What's going on, guys, and welcome back to Rooted in Reptiles. My name is Luke Heister. I just want to say thank you to everyone right off the bat. Austin and I are super appreciative of everyone's support so far as we go down this road to do this channel and hopefully make it educational for everyone. So in this episode, we're just going to be touching off on hybrids. This is a topic that we want to kind of get out there and push right away. It's a big topic, and it is becoming more of a topic of conversation as time goes on and this hobby is continuing to grow and progress. So right off the bat, I want to say that it is absolutely not okay to be breeding or producing or have the intentions of producing hybrids. It is extremely damaging to the hobby, and I should say that the community has really frowned upon this idea. The blue-tongued skink community is a purist community, so the production and propagation of hybrids is not acceptable. There's really no benefit to breeding hybrids and producing them, and that's what we're going to really cover today. So right off the bat, we're going to kind of go through and we're going to list off some things and some key points in this topic of conversation. So hybrids are very damaging to the community. They don't have any benefit whatsoever. We can go and say that hybrids, there's no need for them. People who say that they're enhancing the gene pool, that's absolutely not true. Sure, they're putting new genes into them, but there is no need to be breeding hybrids. Our gene pools are still super strong here in the States. There's a plenty large population of the different species and subspecies that there is no need to be breeding hybrids to enhance the gene population. Northerns are obviously one of the most popular of the subspecies of skinks here in the States, and there are plenty of lines, there's plenty of bloodlines. When these animals were first brought into the States, when they were smuggled in, there was plenty of wild-caught animals that were smuggled in, and the founders of the hobby, guys like Ray, they have plenty of clean and new genes that they still have in their collections. They still have the F1s that were produced from these smuggled animals. Thankfully, the federal government didn't confiscate those. They just took back the smuggled animals. So what we have are all offspring and descendants of the F1s that were left behind. So to say that you're enhancing a gene pool is absolutely, I mean, there's really no argument to that. Another reason that we are pushing for it as a purist community is because it's more of a conservation thing. You know, Australia, sure, they have plenty of blue-tongued skinks down there right now, but their hobby is not necessarily a purist hobby. They're more than willing to breed hybrids, which is perfectly fine. Nothing against the Australian guys. Absolutely not. You're more than welcome to do what you want. Not saying that it's bad. I'm just saying that here in the United States, our circumstances are a little bit different than yours. Like one thing here is, you know, what blue tongue skinks are here is what's here. Any blue tongues, there's nothing Australian that's coming into the States, unless it's coming from breeders in Europe or a different country that we are still importing, exporting with. So we cannot get pure animals from Australia. So if we go and we ruin this gene pool, there's no turning back. Once it's done, it's done. We get one shot. That's all we get. One thing that we should keep in mind is that these hybrids, as they're bred down, so say you take and you breed an IJ to a Northern, the first generation of offspring from those guys is probably going to look closer to one or the other. They might look a little bit mixed, the banding might be a little bit wonky, but so should definitely be able to tell that something's off there. But then you take those and you breed them back to an IJ or a Northern. Now you're putting more genes of the Northern or the IJ back into those offspring, those hybrid offspring, and the offspring from that pairing are probably going to look a little bit more IJ or Northern. And so you can breed this down until you have what appears to be a pure animal or a nearly pure animal. And at heart, it has mixed blood in it, which is just damaging. It's unsettling. It really doesn't do well for us, for those of us who are really pushing for a purist community. We don't want to have to question every animal that we buy. We don't want to have to question the fact that we are no longer able to provide pure animals or breed pure animals. We don't want to get so restricted down to the stock that we have that we're now stuck just breeding back and forth between our animals, and that's all we can get because we're too nervous to go out and buy something else. And I think that is one thing that really needs to be taken into account is people who breed hybrids might say, oh, I'm going to keep these animals for their entire lives. Well, guys like Ray, they have skinks that are 29 years old and they're still doing great. So to be able to say that you can look 29 years down the road and still see yourself having those animals is a little bit of a stretch, I feel. I know I speak for myself here and say, I do my best to stick with things, but life happens. It happens to the best of us. And to be willing to say, I have absolutely the next 29 years of my life down pat is just not even a realistic statement. It's not even a realistic statement for me to say I have the next year of my life planned out or the next 6 months of my life planned out. And what's going to happen here is, if life does happen to one of these breeders who wants to breed and produce these hybrid offspring, what's going to happen to those animals if something happens to that person? They're going to go probably to a reptile show, which people are going to list them as whatever they look closest to. Not saying guys at reptile shows are bad, not talking down on anyone, but for someone who isn't a member of the community and just comes upon these blue tongue skinks, they're going to go on the internet, they're going to find a picture and say, yeah, that looks pretty close to that, so that's probably what it is. And that's what they're going to list it as, and someone new who is looking to get into the community is going to go there and say, oh man, here's one right in front of me, I don't have to get it shipped in, I don't have to do any of this nonsense over the internet, I got it right here in front of me, here's cash, I'll take my skink. And what's going to happen is that person's going to say, oh, now I want to breed, so now there's the possibility that they're going to take that animal and they're going to breed it, and that is just going to create this giant ripple effect where these animals are just going to get so spread out that it's really going to muddle the bloodline. So we just ask, you know, if you have an animal that is producing offspring that you're really kind of, you know, thinking maybe those offspring are hybrids, we just ask, you know, it might be best to just keep that one as a pet. It's better to look out for the community and look out for the greater good than look out for, you know, wanting to make a couple extra dollars. Life isn't all about money. Sure, we need money to keep going and keep funding our projects, but you know, if you're really just damaging the hobby, then it's really not beneficial. And you have to look at what's best for everyone else sometimes. You know, it's not always about putting an extra $1,000 in your pocket at the end of the year because you continue to breed that animal, when you could find out, you know, in 2 years the blue-tongued skink community is in shambles because everything is so muddled now that breeders are no longer wanting to buy, and no one trusts anyone anymore, and it just all goes downhill from there, and that's really not what we want. Another point that is being raised about the conservation aspect is if something happens in Australia, it would be nice to be able to have a pure population of skinks that we can go and have the possibility of reintroducing into the wild. You know, the Australian guys not too up with their hobby. It's hard enough, you know, doing life, doing this, taking care of the animals, to keep up with the American hobby, let alone, you know, the Australian one. Sure, they're making amazing skinks down there, don't get me wrong. And I follow them on Instagram, but, you know, I can't say, you know, how many pure animals they're actually working with down there. So if it turns out, you know, that they aren't as concerned with pure animals because they're in Australia, it might not be so easy for the community to reintroduce those pure animals back into the wild, which it could then fall onto us. There's the possibility that, you know, one day the Australian government might say, you know, we want to reintroduce these animals back into the wild as pure animals, and they're going to look for the largest and most reputable pure population they can find, which is where we could come into play. I feel like it would be super rewarding, you know, if we as a community, or if I as a person, could aid in the preservation and conservation of these amazing, amazing reptiles. They're absolutely beautiful. They are just great. All around, they're just awesome pets. And so I think that that is a big thing, you know. You don't want to, I would just like to be able to play a part in something bigger than myself, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at. And I feel like we all have that feeling in life. And I should say that another point about the hybrid breeding that a lot of people bring up in the community is the possible health risks involved in hybrid breeding, because, you know, these species, subspecies, and locales, they all live a little bit different, especially breeding like an island skink with an Australian skink. You know, they're two different environments, you know, they wouldn't naturally meet up. So like, if you, the only real health risk that you could truly run into here would be breeding a high humidity animal with a low humidity animal. And what's going to happen is their offspring is not going to necessarily thrive, because you're not going to know, okay, should these animals be high humidity or should they be low humidity, because mom's high humidity and dad's low humidity. So what do I really do with them? So you're going to be trying to play around with the humidity to try and get them to thrive, and meanwhile they're not doing so hot. And to me, trying to produce hybrids for personal gain and sacrificing the health of that animal isn't really worth it. It's like I said earlier, it's not all about money. You don't need to become rich to be rewarded. I'm rich in my animals. I'm not necessarily rich in my bank account, and I'm perfectly fine in that. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. We're doing this and we're getting income from it, but it's not all about that. We use our income, to feed them and care for them and continue to push forward with what we're doing. But at the end of the day, it's not all about money. There is absolutely a market, and one thing that we have done as a community is we've said, hey, these hybrids, they are worthless. You bring these hybrids here, and what do you want for them? Because they're not worth anything, which is awesome to see, that the community is pushing for this purity for the most part, and saying, we don't support this. And here's a prime example. You might think, I'm going to go and create these brand new skinks that are hybrids, and people are going to look at you and go, you thought you were going to get rich. Well, now you have all these skinks and no one wants to buy them because they're hybrids. Which is nice to, see that support. And I just think that that is a good aspect of this. The hybrid animals is just an extremely damaging thing that someone could do. And I would prefer, and I know that Austin would prefer, and everyone would prefer to keep it purist. Guys like Ray have been pushing for pure animals for the beginning of this hobby. They haven't wavered from that. Ray will tell me stories where he would get an animal that he might question. He'll package it up in a box and ship it off to Japan. They're more than welcome to have them, but to keep them here is not beneficial to anyone. And so we just, want to push for that and continue to push for it. One thing that, is nice to see is the support for this purist idea. I would say that 95% of the community is in support of it, as far as I can tell. But there is, a small percentage of people who are keeping and breeding and producing hybrids, and they're selling hybrids to people who aren't in the community, or who are just wanting to get into the community, and they go on the internet and they search blue-tongued skinks for sale, and some of these people are popping up. One thing that needs to be considered as well is the fact that some of these species, subspecies, and locales of skinks, their numbers are extremely limited. There might only be a handful, 3, 4, 5 of some of these locales in the States, and to hybridize those animals just basically kills it. There's no going back. We talked about this a little bit earlier, is that if you muddle one of these very limited quantity species or subspecies or locales, for that matter, if you muddle those, what little blood is here, they're gone, basically. They're gone from the States. The pure animals will still exist, but you're now throwing these impure animals out, and that's just kind of dangerous, and it's not very responsible, which I hate to see happen. I would prefer, just see people do what's right, and do what's best for the community as a whole, rather than what's just best for them. If any of you guys has any further questions, or would like to talk about this topic any further, feel free to contact me. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me in the Blue Tongue Skin pages. You can find my Rooted in Reptiles page on Facebook and Instagram. So, if you wanted to talk further about this topic, or any topic really, feel free to send me a message. We will be doing an episode here where it's question and answer. So if it's a question that I see might be beneficial to the group as a whole, then I'll answer it there. I would love to hear questions, hear feedback from everyone. I know that Austin and I both would love to do that. So, like I said, you're more than welcome to message me. Absolutely, feel free. I'd just like to thank everyone again for tuning in and watching this episode. And as always, hit that like button, comment, and subscribe. Thank you guys.